Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And I believe that one of my most recent commenters or watchers ended up giving me a link, to a video by John Boxing Pound for Pound the Best. And of course, I've reviewed multiple videos by this channel. Of course, anyone who has watched my channel knows that I have reviewed, a lot of content by a multitude of channels from Dante's Boxing Nation, from, the IBFP to Aki TV to Boxing Ego to this channel right here, but of course, I'm also steering a little bit more away from that content, not completely going away from it, because a part of this channel and really what this channel is about is the psychology and the philosophy behind the mindsets of so many people, within that other sports world or, whatever it may be, because what this channel really is revealing that of the true motivations or machinations, of what people's motivations actually are. I'm someone that likes to read in between the lines, and I'm someone that likes to get to the root of issues, and someone that, of course, likes to see what someone is truly about, and of course, many people, when someone posts a video, they may, just assume that that person is, overall, quote unquote, hating on that person or something like that, but they may not be. They may be saying something that might be quote unquote controversial to a lot of people, but maybe, it may have a little bit of relevance of truth. Now, you know, the reason why I review so many of the LDBC and new media channels, including this man right here, although he's not the biggest channel out there, and certain people have said, well, why do you review this channel, although it's a little bit smaller? Shouldn't you be more reviewing that of the channels of Dante's Boxing Nation and those guys, or some of the bigger channels? Well, the point is that, the point of my channel, at least when I do videos like this, it isn't to just review that of the bigger channels, because the point of this channel is not to, tear down other channels or to really, humiliate them. What it really is pointing out overall, once again, is a certain amount of double standards and propaganda. That's really what this channel is about. It's from a truth sort of standpoint. Now, of course, every channel, overall says to be that, but that's pretty much what this is, to put things in their proper place. That way people overall don't take a look at this and say, oh, well, this is what happened, when really, to be honest with you, that's not the reality of the situation whatsoever. Because in boxing especially, there are so many narratives, but not really just boxing, really in everything. Tennis, and really a whole bunch of other stuff. Of course, for those of you that have watched my tennis videos, you would know a lot of the propaganda that I have seen for Serena Williams and Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, and of course, the ones that I've also seen against Novak Djokovic. There's a lot of propaganda in the NBA and the MLB. Basically, everything, especially in this day and age, is so politicized. So you have to be very, very careful, because it's very easy to get succumbed or to get suckered in, to a narrative that quote unquote might be true to the masses, but you may figure out a little bit later on that you were kind of suckered into something, and it seemed realistic because of what they were propagating to you. But, that being stated, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this, and for those of you, by the way, before we get into this, for those of you that have not seen my most recent content, certainly go check out some of my new movie reviews, or my movie review of Send Help. That's the only one that I have, right now. But I will be posting movie reviews once again very soon, and also more videos about boxing, certain lists, and just other fun videos as well. As I stated, I will be doing reviews for video games and movies and stuff like that. I'll be probably doing a movie review, on certain movies like Scream, the new one that's coming out, as well as The Odyssey and other ones like that. Because I do have a great love for film. But for those of you that have not checked out, my Send Help review, certainly let me know what you think. And for those of you that have a recommendation for a new movie that, you want me to do, or a movie that you want me to review, certainly let me know. Because other movies that I really want to get to is also Predator Badlands and Sinners as well. Two movies that came out last year, I believe, that attracted a lot of attention, both controversially and both, with a great amount, of relevance and also praise as well. So just wanted to state that. And I'll also be doing more videos on Ryan Garcia very soon as well as Mr. Naoya Inoue. But that being stated, I wanted to talk about this because for so many years, especially in boxing, pretty much since I've been around it, there's been certain fighters that would be on the top 5 pound for pound list that certain people would state, quote unquote, did not deserve it. But it all depends on your perspective. Now, to me, as long as you have a perspective that is keeping somewhat of the same standards, overall, I don't really have a problem with it. But, many people, and I've always stated this, Many people, of course, when they take a look at Naoya Inoue and Terrence Bud Crawford, many people take a look at their careers as if they're completely opposite. You know, whether you're from the LDBC or whether you're a Naoya Inoue fan, many people take a look at their careers as if they are completely opposite. And to be quite honest with you, they're not really that opposite. When you take a look at Naoya Inoue right now, he is 32 years old, and he's in a very similar situation that Terrence Bud Crawford was, you know, in the earlier part of his career. And although a certain amount of the LDBC fanboys and those guys don't want to admit it, and don't get it twisted, is this a video bashing Terrence Bud Crawford? No, it is not. And keep in mind that this is not the video that I believe that person sent me a link to, but the reason why I wanted to do this is because this was the video, in my view, that would provide the most amount of perspective, information, and be the most revelatory. The other video is a video that I've done a lot, and I've done this video to a degree as well, but I wanted to do this one once again. But the truth is about both Terrence Crawford and Inoue is that they are both terrific fighters. They're both great fighters. Terrence Bud Crawford, of course, proved himself to be an all-time great level fighter, but there was a very long time to where we did not know how great that Terrence Bud Crawford actually was. And right now, it's somewhat the same with Inoue. We know that they're both all-time greatly skilled fighters, but to be in the all-time great conversation, you have to defeat quote-unquote great names. And Terrence Bud Crawford for a very long time was lacking a certain amount of great names. It just is what it is. You know, it's whatever. And Inoue right now, although he does maybe have a select 8 great names on his resume, he is missing a few names that you would take a look at on his resume and say, wow, you know, like he's Mayweather level, he's Pacquiao level. And to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure if Crawford, in terms of resume, you know, or Inoue, I'm not quite sure if either of those guys are ever going to be on the level of a Pacquiao or Mayweather. Because when you talk about resumes, Pacquiao and Mayweather probably have the 2 best resumes out of any other all-time great level fighter that I know of. I mean, in terms of other all-time great level resumes that probably would live up to the hype, maybe Sugar Ray Leonard, but that's really about it. To be honest with you, there's no other fighter within the history of the game that I can think of that probably would have as great of resumes as those 3 fighters. But anyways, just continuing forward, I thought that this would be very particularly interesting because Inoue still does have a lot of proving left to do to prove that he is completely on the level of guys like Usyk and Terrence Bud Crawford, but I don't think that he's super far off from them. And it is going to be very interesting because Inoue is eventually going to have to step up to that 126-pound weight class, and we will see how truly great he actually is. But there's no doubt that Inoue, in my view, is at the very least deserving of being a top 3 to top 4 pound-for-pound fighter, especially after his victories over guys like Steven Fulton, MJ Akhmadaliev, and guys like that. But we're going to explain all that, you know, in this video. But anyways, let's see what Mr. John Boxing has to say. Let's get straight into it.
You know, this irritates me a lot. You know, it really does. When you have boxing fans who want to come after me for speaking the truth. Now you got some weird guy trying to do a response video to one of the videos that I've made, basically calling Inoue a hype job. And then you got these other characters that's running around here and their feelings about what I think about Inoue. Well, Bud Crawford has a 80 resume too. Terrence Crawford's resume was way better than Inoue's resume before he beat Canelo.
Well, his resume was better by the time he beat guys like Errol Spence and Sean Porter, but it was not way better. And the reason why I claim that is because Terrence Bud Crawford, and, you know, they can claim whatever they want to for many years. But at the end of the day, a lot of these LDBC and new media, and let's be real, very racialized, you know, racist and very biased, you know, pro-blackity black channels on YouTube. And when I say that, I'm not talking about people that support black fighters. You know, people, of course, get on my YouTube channel, they get in their feelings, they get in their emotions, and think that I'm just trying to, you know, dish out on black fighters and black channels. That's not what I'm doing. But what I am talking about is the channels that very clearly are very racialized and very blinded by that overall of their racial hate or that of their racial bias. Because they always feel that they have to compete with that of the other racist fans, of the non, you know, black racist fans. And they always feel like they have to compete and do a war with them and stay on code in order to spread all this propaganda and bullshit. So it just becomes a huge politicized war. And I'm not into politics. This is not a channel that is for politics. If I talk about politics, it's always to address what is truly going on. I'm not a person that, you know, is someone that likes to spread a bunch of bullshit or propaganda. Anyway. But the point is about Terrence Bud Crawford is that for a very long time, he was looked at as a top 3 pound-for-pound fighter for many years, even before he got the wins over Errol Spence Jr. or Sean Porter. And that's a fact. He was beating a lot of guys that, to be honest with you, were probably looked at as around the same caliber as what Inoue was beating at times, and he was still counted as top 2 or top 3 pound for pound. And these guys did not have an issue with it. But I've always told people, if Terrence Bud Crawford was a Caucasian fighter, or if he was a non-black fighter, these guys would not be talking about Terrence Bud Crawford. In fact, they'd be telling you how overrated he is. That's what they'd be telling you. There's no way that if Terrence Bud Crawford was a Caucasian fighter, even as skilled as what he is, if he was a Caucasian fighter or an Asian fighter or something like that, and he was beating guys like Julius Ndongo, overall, and Aegis Kavalaskas and Jeff Horn, they'd be saying, "Are you fucking kidding me?" That's what they'd be saying. Give me a fucking break. Anyways.
That's for a fact. You guys are not going to sit here and tell me that Inoue's resume was on the same level as Bud Crawford's resume before Bud Crawford beat Canelo.
Well, what we really have to compare it to is what were their resumes at that point at the age of 32. I don't personally remember what Crawford's complete resume was at the age of 32, but one could actually debate that Inoue's resume is slightly better than Terrence Bud Crawford's at the age of 32. Because Inoue is already a 4-weight division champion. He's unified in 2 separate weight classes by the age of 31 or 32. And on top of that, he did defeat Stephen Fulton, Akhmadaliev, MJ Akhmadaliev. He also defeated Marlon Zapales. I would give Marlon Zapales the grade of an A- level fighter because he was actually able to beat MJ Akhmadaliev. And Akhmadaliev has proven that he is a decent fighter, that he's someone that not only is an Olympic, medalist within that of the amateurs, or the Olympics, but on top of that, he's someone that actually is, a very dangerous boxer. And of course, guys like Dante and all this other bullshit, of course, they've seen Inoue as a threat to the pound for pound list, so they tried to use MJ Akhmadaliev and Stephen Fulton for that matter, overall to tear down, Mr. Naoya Inoue, and then Inoue beat the shit out of them, and now they're just saying that those guys weren't really that good. Dante, people forget, Dante's Boxing Nation and some of these, LDBC and new media channels, they were placing Stephen Fulton top 5 pound for pound. They were placing in top 5 or above Inoue, actually. And they stated that even though they did not have Inoue in their top 5, they said, well, if Fulton is going to defeat Inoue, then he has to be top 3 pound for pound, because of their standards, right? But you did not have Inoue there. So what a lot of these guys do, and it's not just them, it's people in general who have an agenda, and ESPN and Ring Magazine does this as well. They will plant a fighter in the top 10 pound for pound list because they know that is going to make another great fighter look good, even though they know that fighter probably does not deserve to be there. And I'm not claiming that the LDBC and new media that they didn't think that Stephen Fulton deserved to be there, but they definitely, were going to place him higher than what he deserved to be in order to, basically kick Inoue and a lot of those small weight class fighters off the list. But anyway.
A lot of these fighters that Inoue has beat, none of you guys has ever talked about, and that's my point.
But you notice that Stephen Fulton was never talked about again, even when he became a 2-weight division champion and beat Brandon Figueroa. And he wasn't even talked about when he faced out of Shaquille Foster, whatever the fuck his name was. Sorry, I'm bad at pronouncing that dude's name. But they only, Dante, I noticed, only recently talked about Stephen Fulton when he got the shit kicked out of him over against, Shaquille Foster. And the reason why that is because he could basically tear down that win to a degree because Stephen Fulton was good, but, he just got the shit kicked out of him over Foster, so how good is he really? That was the only time that Dante ever brought him up. So everything that Dante does, and a lot of these guys, there's always a move behind it. There's always a political reason.
How are you going to sit here and say that Inoue's resume is good when you never talk about the fighters that he's beaten? The only 2 fighters that you guys only mention are Stephen Fulton and Nonito Donaire.
Well, right, but these are 2 questions that I have to ask you, Mr. John Boxing. But just because a fighter is not talked about, does that necessarily mean that they were not a decently great fighter or that they were not a very good fighter? There are certain fighters out there that are not necessarily talked about, but they were not bad fighters. Arasani Lara is not talked about that often, but he still is a very great fighter, or a great fighter when he was at his peak. There are other fighters that are very talented. Carl Frampton was a very decent fighter. People don't really talk about him that much, but he was someone that was a very decent fighter. And there's no offense against Terrence Bud Crawford, but who really was fucking talking about guys like Yuriorkis Gamboa or Victor Postal or Julius Ndongo, when he was when he was reigning there? No one was talking about those guys years later. No one gave a fuck about those guys. No one ever talked about Victor Postal ever again when he ended up overall losing to that of Terrence Bud Crawford. That man was erased off the earth. because no one gave a shit. It is what it is. Anyways, now that being stated, is it kind of similar with Inoue? Yes, but do I believe that there are A grade level fighters that he fought that aren't mentioned that much? Yeah, like Marlon Tapales. I would say that Tapales has enough boxing ability to where you could at least claim him as an A minus level fighter, at least for those weight classes. And he did beat MJ Akhmadaliev. That does have to be mentioned. He showed enough boxing ability to beat MJ Akhmadaliev, who was a legit unified champ there. Anyways.
When Bud Crawford was coming up, Bud Crawford got busy early on in his career. He was a late replacement opponent for a guy who was basically on the come up. British Prescott was the first fighter to give Amir Khan his knockout loss.
Well, this is where I have to correct you, Mr. John Boxing, and this is where he's reaching a little bit. And maybe he does not know this. But by the time that Terence Bud Crawford fought that other Breeders Prescott was a very defeatable fighter. He had already suffered 4 losses by the time that Terence Bud Crawford had fought that other Breeders Prescott. So, I mean, in hindsight, of course, looking at it back then, not knowing what Crawford would be, of course, it's very impressive because he embarrassed that man and he moved up a weight class, I believe, from 135 to 140 on like 2 weeks' notice and completely outboxed him. So, of course, at the time, it was impressive. But looking at it, in 2020 hindsight, looking how great of a fighter that Crawford would be actually, I mean, it's kind of something that he really should have did because Breeders Prescott is not someone that is a fantastic fighter. He did beat Amir Khan very early on in his career. I doubt that he would have defeated him later on. He defeated Amir Khan very early on in his career before he was even a champion. And to be quite honest with you, Amir Khan, even at his best, I'm not really quite sure if Amir Khan was ever that great in the first place. There's a reason why he lost a lot of his bigger fights. Like, there's a reason why he lost to Danny Garcia. There's a reason, overall, although I don't think that he probably should have lost the Lamont Peterson fight. He had a very big problem with that one. I believe that there was a couple of other fights that he lost as well. Amir Khan was around an A-minus level fighter, but he was never, majorly elite.
British Prescott was experienced, dangerous, and in the peak of his prime.
No, he was not. Breeders Prescott was not at the peak of his prime. And even if Breeders Prescott was at the peak of his prime, who gives a shit? Breeders Prescott now, if you take a look at his career, is like, 30-19 or something like that? Breeders Prescott is not that good. This is what I mean overall by keeping the same standards. It's no offense. And don't get it twisted. There are certain fighters that once upon a time were champions or relatively talented, and they ended up not having a great second half of their career, like DeMarcus Chop Chop Corley. But at the end of the day, I mean, the thing is that, Breeders Prescott was never that good, and he was not at the peak of his prime, because Breeders Prescott had already had 4 losses by the time that Terence Bud Crawford had fought him. So Breeders Prescott was expected to lose again. Now, of course, it was impressive at the time what Crawford was able to do for that young of an age. But, I mean, the thing is that, let's stop acting like Breeders Prescott was this great dude. And Breeders Prescott was never even a champion, not even close. So I mean, to say that, it would not be correct to say, for example, that Breeders Prescott would be better than that even of a Louis Neri or someone like that. You wouldn't even be able to debate it.
Crawford only had 16 or 15 fights, inexperienced, and was a late replacement opponent. He went in there and dog walked British Prescott. You see, Terence Crawford's resume didn't begin there. His resume began the moment that he knocked out an undefeated Yuriorkis Gamboa or Young Boxing.
Well, he did defeat not a young, but he did defeat an undefeated Yuriorkis Gamboa, but also a Gamboa who was massively outsized for that weight class. And don't get it twisted, the win still was impressive. But that win was, when you take a look at it, it's not, this A-plus level win. Don't get it twisted. It was a A-grade level win. Gamboa was someone who was very technical. He actually, I believe, was favored to win that fight. A lot of people did not expect Crawford to win that fight. That was the only boxing fight that I ever went to in real life. Of course, it was in my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, and that was a tremendous fight. I went to go watch it with my father. I believe that I was about 15, 16 years old when that happened. But anyways, that being stated overall, that was a tremendous fight and a tremendous performance in the second half by that of Terence Bud Crawford that showed the beginning of his greatness. But that win that Terence Bud Crawford had over Yuriorkis Gamboa, I don't know if I would really claim that that's as great of a win as, say, Inoue's win over Stephon Fulton. Now, of course, are the wins, over Errol Spence and Canelo Alvarez, of course, greater than any of the wins in Inoue's career? Yes, of course they are. But that being stated, at least in my view, they are, obviously. But the thing is that when you're comparing the ages, Inoue is 32 years old. Terrence Bud Crawford, by the time he was 32, I'm still pretty sure that he was at 140 or just beginning at 147. But anyways,
Yorkers Gamboa came up in weight. This weight jump is to get on my damn nerves with you guys.
well, at the end of the day, it is a relevant point. Yuriorkis Gamboa had to move up in weight because basically no one there would fight him. I mean, and once again, there's always people that criticize Canelo Alvarez for, ducking and criticizing Mayweather for ducking and criticizing a lot of other fighters for ducking. You want to know who a real cherry picker was? His name was Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia allegedly was out for 2 years because of promotional issues with Bob Arum. I believe that it also partially was to not fight Yuriorkis Gamboa. It's no offense against Mikey Garcia. Love the fighter. I think that he's a tremendous fighter. But every time there was a big threat, overall that could have potentially beat him, he never fought their ass. He never fought Gamboa. He never fought that about Vasyl Lomachenko. He never tried to fight Crawford at 140, which I kind of understand that. But at the end of the day, and the reason why I say I kind of understand that is because by that time, Crawford was getting ready to move up to 147, and he was very clearly outgrowing that weight class. And Mikey was really more of around a 140 to 135 pounder. But he could have fought Lomachenko. He could have fought, some of those other guys, even Devin Haney and Teofimo. That's why no one ever talks about Mikey, because he never fought shit. The best fighters in his career that he ever fought were guys like Adrian Broner, Orlando Salido, and Salido was a decent fighter, but he wasn't ever someone that was A+. Now he did get that great win over Vasyl Lomachenko in the early part of his career. He fought very dirty in that fight. And on top of that, he fought a Lomachenko that was just beginning his professional career, But anyways.
Because you don't care when smaller fighters move up to fight the fighters that you like. You actually give these fighters that you like a ton of credit when they beat a smaller fighter. Yorkis Gamboa was already a lightweight before Crawford beat him. Yorkis Gamboa didn't move up from 126 to 135 to fight Terrence Crawford. He already had made a home at 135 before he fought Terrence Crawford.
Yes, he did. He fought a guy that was probably a bum there because I don't even remember his name. And on top of that, Gamboa, just because you move up, a weight class does not mean that you naturally belong there. Trinidad, when he moved up to 160, I believe that he beat William Joppy right before he fought Bernard Hopkins. But you could tell very easily that Felix Trinidad did not belong in the ring of Bernard Hopkins, both in terms of skill somewhat and also in terms of size. That's why Bernard Hopkins, although a lot of people put him on a very high level, to me, he's probably the most overrated all-time great boxer of all time. Because you put Bernard Hopkins in a very talented, in the ring with a very talented fighter that actually could box in a multitude of ways that was similar in size, he usually could not handle them. And that comes from Joe Calzaghe, Jermaine Taylor, Roy Jones Jr., whoever it is. Anyways.
But Yorkis Gamboa, in my opinion, at that time, at that time, the undefeated Yorkis Gamboa, at that time, is a better fighter than everyone that Inoue has fought up until this point.
You could maybe debate that, but there's no 100% evidence for that. Gamboa was a very talented fighter. He was someone that was very athletically sound, but defensively, he was terrible. That's why Gamboa, he was known for being a little bit chinny, and he was, known for being dropped in several of his fights because he was someone that was very technically gifted. I believe that he was even a gold medalist. If I'm wrong about that, then someone correct me. He had someone of the, Cuban boxing pedigree, but defensively, he was horrid. He would keep his chin, wide up in the air sometimes. He would get a little bit too thirsty, to get the offense off, and all those faults showed in the Terrence Bud Crawford fight because Gamboa was actually winning the first 4 rounds of that fight, but Crawford, with his genius level, intellect as a boxer, overall, and on top of that, with Gamboa's faults, eventually opening up and tiring out as the fight went along, and with him not being able to be patient and him going for repeated rushing offense, they all showed up in that fight, and eventually it cost him to get stopped.
Try to debunk that. Yorkis Gamboa at that time, the undefeated Yorkis Gamboa at that time, is a better fighter than everyone that Inoue has fought up until this point.
Well, you can't really 100% debunk that. I think that maybe you could debate it, but you can't necessarily 100% prove it either. Because when we're talking about the best opponent up until that point, we're of course talking about Steve Von Fulton versus Yuriorkis Gamboa. But one thing I'll say about Inoue, and I'm going to have to go with Inoue's win over Fulton for this as the more impactful one, and the reason why I have to say that is because A, Fulton was in his natural weight class, Inoue was in his 4th one, and he stopped him within 8 rounds. He literally did not lose a single round to Fulton. And Fulton was looked at as a guy that was an all-around great complete fighter and was supposed to be the defensive slick black fighter. And Inoue literally embarrassed him. Like, he literally embarrassed him and completely outboxed him at his own game. Now, Gamboa, one could debate that he's more talented than Fulton. You could debate that maybe. But the thing overall is that Gamboa really had not defeated anyone really up until that point, and Crawford was very clearly bigger than that of Gamboa. So, I mean, it just is what it is. That does have to be mentioned. So in terms of who is more talented, I mean, you can debate who's more talented, but anyone, of course, who knows me knows that I always contribute size as a factor, overall. And, so I'd have to say that Inoue's win over Fulton, just for me, was more impactful because I was looked at as a 50-50 fight. Now, of course, Gamboa was, somewhat of a 50-50 fight versus Crawford, but taking a look at it in hindsight, of course, and who knows, maybe the Fulton win will change one day too. We still have to see how good he really is. Although I still think it'll age well because he became a two-weight division champion. Although he recently got his ass kicked against Oshaki Foster. There we go. I think I said his name right that time. But anyways, the problem is that, we'll see how that ages. But I do think that Inoue's win over Fulton was the more impactful of the two because of the size. And on top of that, just what that fight meant for Inoue. Now, of course, Crawford's win over Gamboa was tremendous. But he was a decent amount bigger than Gamboa. That does have to be mentioned. Gamboa really did not belong with that weight class.
Yorkis Gamboa at that time beats everyone that Inoue has beaten. Yorkis Gamboa, when he was coming up, when he was fighting at 126 pounds, Nonito Donaire in his prime didn't want no parts of Yorkis Gamboa. He actually avoided Yorkis Gamboa. Juan Manuel Lopez avoided Yorkis Gamboa. And who on Inoue's resume that you can point to and say, this guy is better than the undefeated Victor Postol? The Victor Postol that was coming off a...
Well, I can tell you a few fighters that might be quote-unquote better than Victor Postol. It's no offense against Victor Postol. He had that one great performance over Lucas Matisse, who was always inconsistent as a performer and someone who was a bit small for 140. And Postol was, really, to be quite honest with you, a welterweight. He was someone that was very big for that weight class and very lengthy. He had that one great performance, and then after that, he was never to be heard from again. He got completely outboxed by Terrence Bud Crawford. He was very stiff. He was someone, of course, that was an A- level fighter, debatably, but would I claim that he's more talented than guys like MJ Akhmadaliev or or guys like Marlon Tapalas? No, he's around their same level. And Fulton is definitely better than Postol. I'm sorry, but it is what it is.
Knockout win over the machine Lucas Matisse. Lucas Matisse has never been stopped before.
Right, but Lucas Matisse had lost before. He had lost to Danny Garcia. I believe that he had even lost to an older Zab Judah in the beginning of his career. So it's important to mention that Lucas Matisse, although he was a borderline great fighter, he was not someone that was ever a top 10 level pound for pound fighter, or at least not someone that was ever consistently a top 10 level pound for pound fighter. And it's no offense, but if you're getting outboxed by a Danny Garcia, and Danny Garcia is someone that is a very good boxer, but he's not someone that is ever an A+ level fighter. If you're getting outboxed by a Danny Garcia, you're no higher than an A- level boxer. Sorry, but it is what it is.
Postol was the first fighter to stop Lucas Matisse. Who on Inoue's resume is better than that version of a Victor Postol? Oh, but Crawford don't have a resume. The hell he don't. What do you mean he doesn't have a resume? Yorkis Gamboa and Victor Postol are already two fighters that are better than everyone that Inoue has fought up until this point.
Well, no, they're not. I mean, you can maybe have a debate with Yorkis Gamboa, but Victor Postol, nah, sorry. He was another stiff, from Europe that was relatively talented. But, once you got past, some of the things that he could do, he had nothing else.
Just those two fighters alone are better fighters than every fighter that Inoue has fought up until the...
Once again, I've already stated this. If Terrence Bud Crawford was a quote-unquote Caucasian fighter, they'd be stating, who the fuck is Victor Postol? that's what they'd be stating. They say Victor Postol is not that good. That's what they would be claiming.
This point. You can't point to any single fighter on Inoue's resume and say that this guy can beat Yorkis Gamboa and Victor Postol.
Well, I guarantee you that if Steve Fulton and Victor Postol were in the same weight class, Steve Fulton would beat Victor Postol, and not only would he beat Victor Postol, he would make it look easy. It's no offense against Postol, But he had that one great performance over Matisse because he was massively outsized. He was very slow, very stiff. He was someone that knew how to use his range, but he didn't change levels well at all. He did not move his head off the center line. And once he finally fought people that could box, like Terrence Crawford and Josh Taylor, he lost. It is what it is. So I mean, no, to say that Victor Postal is better than Fulton, nah, sorry, but no, it's really not that close either. Sorry, not in accomplishments, not in skill, not in anything really, not in resume either. So I mean, it is what it is.
Now, I'm not talking about today's version of these
Well,
of Victor.
well, resume actually might be close because of course Postal had that great win over Matisse, but Fulton, I believe that he has the 2 wins over Figueroa, and I think that he also has a great win actually over Angelo Leo. Two guys that actually I would claim are A grade level fighters at 126 right now. Two champions there, I believe.
Postal and Yorkers Gamboa. I'm talking about when they were undefeated before Bud Crawford fought them. So these two fighters alone are already better fighters than everyone in Inoue, than every fighter that's on Inoue's resume. And I'm not even to the Sean Porters yet. I'm not even there yet. I'm still at 135 and 140. Some of you guys, y'all keep picking at Julius Ndongo. I've heard an anti-black boxing fan, just keep picking at Julius Ndongo. Julius Ndongo is not Bud Crawford's resume. Julius Ndongo was a fighter that Bud Crawford had to go through to become undisputed. But Julius Ndongo is not Bud Crawford's resume. Isn't it crazy how, a particular anti-black boxing fan loves to pick at Julius Ndongo? Or Julius Ndongo wasn't a fighter that was that good when Crawford beat him. Well, who the hell was Paul Butler? At least.
Well, although I agree with that, the point also remains is that, if we are comparing the resumes, then that is the question. When we compare Terrence Bud Crawford at the age of 32, now I'm not sure when that is. I'm going to guess that it was around the time that he probably had unified the 140-pound weight class. I think that he was around, 31 to 33 at that time, but anywhere from there, who had the better resume between the two at then? It was either about the same, or to be quite honest with you, one could debate that it was Inoue. And I know that certain people that they may disagree with that, but there's no offense against Crawford, but he also defeated a certain amount of fighters that would not really be looked at as that good. I mean, no offense, but a lot of the champions that he defeated, or champions that would become champions later on, like Romundo Beltran and, Ricky Burns and Julius Ndongo, those guys are not A-grade level fighters. I'm sorry. It is what it is. Anyway.
Julius Ndongo beat someone who you guys thought Bud Crawford was avoiding. Y'all remember that?
Well, they stated that, and although I do agree with John Boxing there, just talking about it from a logical perspective, the guy that, of course, he's talking about was the undefeated Russian fighter, Edward Troyanowski. Troyanowski was never really that good of a fighter. He was very stiff, and he was someone that, I believe lost to Julius Ndongo, once. I believe he got knocked out either in the first or the second round. Julius Ndongo was someone that, God, you take a look at him. That man had some of the worst legs I've ever seen in my life. That man fought like Bambi.
He beat someone, Troyanowski, that you guys thought Terrence Crawford was avoiding. And then he went over there and beat Ricky Burns for the belt. But who?
Right, but Ricky Burns is not that good. I'm sorry. But every time Ricky Burns has pretty much been in a big fight, he pretty much has ended up losing. It's no offense. Like a lot of these channels, they always have to say, well, Terrence Crawford beat Ricky Burns. Those guys are not that good. I'm sorry, but it is what it is. Now, was he probably better than guys like Paul Butler or something like that? Yeah, I mean, I'll give Terrence Bud Crawford that. But, were a lot of these guys better than Steve Von Fulton or MJ or Marlon DePaulis? No, they weren't better than them. But anyway, they probably weren't even better than, the 37-year-old Nonito Donaire that, Inoue fought. But I mean, it is what it is. Now, if you want to claim that Gamboa is better than some of those guys, you can claim that if you want to. But, I mean, there's no complete proof for that. And if we're also going to go there, Gamboa was only, I believe, a one-weight division champion in terms of winning actual belts. Fulton actually was a two-weight division champion. So, I mean, we have to, give Inoue some credit here. He did defeat Luis Neri, who once upon a time was looked at as a great fighter. He had only ever lost to Brendan Figueroa, who has proved himself to be an A-grade level champion and beaten a multitude of names. So we have to give Inoue that. We have to give, him debatably an A- name over Neri. We have to give him MJ Akhmadaliev. We have to give him Marlon DePaulis, in my view, Stephen Fulton, and maybe an older version of Donaire. Now, if you want to debate that some of those guys are B-grade level fighters, you can, but I think that you could also debate that some of those are A-grade level fighters. The two A minus level, the A grade that level win that he for sure has is Fulton. That's A grade, not A plus, but A grade in my view. A minus I would give to Marlon Tapales and MJ Akhmadaliev, and I'd also give Neri an A minus as well because he was a legit two-way division champion, and he beat a multitude of champions.
Paul Butler. Oh, he's a nobody because none of you guys talked about him before and even after Inoue beat him for the undisputed. Marlon Tapales, are you? No. Marlon, are you? Yeah, okay. Marlon Tapales.
Well, people shit all over Marlon Tapales, especially because he's a Filipino fighter, and he wasn't that known, and I believe he had a few losses before then, but he was at the peak of his career. He had just, won two belts off of MJ Akhmadaliev, and Akhmadaliev was looked at as the next big up-and-coming thing in that weight class, and he got even better after that Tapales loss, but, that was a big fight at the time, and Tapales proved that he could legit box, and I was a little bit surprised by Tapales in that fight because he showed that he actually had some decent boxing ability. So I actually have to give, Tapales the grade of A minus.
Really? No. He'll be forgotten, or he's already forgotten about because no one's talking about him.
Well, right, but so is Victor Postal. Name me one person other than a lot of these Terrence Bud Crawford fanboy channels. Name me any other channels that really talk about Victor Postal. like name me boxing pundits that actually say, man, you guys remember Victor Postal? You guys remember the classic fighter Victor Postal? No one gives a fuck about Victor Postal. He was another stiff European, overall. And of course, certain people overall, they love to say, well, he was a part of the Ukrainian boxing school, like Lomachenko and Usyk. No, he fucking wasn't. Was he a part of the Ukrainian school? Yes, he was. But people, of course, in order to boost that win, they try to make it seem like he was like Lomachenko or Usyk or some shit. He was nowhere near close. He fought nothing like them. Anyways. And once again, in no way is that me trying to dismiss Crawford's win. I think that you can claim that it was a minus level win. If we're gonna claim that Marlon Tapales and MJ Akhmadaliev that they were A minus level wins, I think at the very least you should claim that Postal was a minus level win. But let's stop trying to sit here and pretend like Postal is just so much better than these guys. He's not.
The only two fighters on Inoue's resume that you guys talk about is Stephen Fulton and Nonito Donaire. That's it. Inoue has 30 fights. And out of those 30 fights, only 2 fights that you guys love to talk about. And that is his fight with Nonito Donaire and Stephen Fulton. That's because Nonito Donaire is a name and Stephen Fulton was a celebrated fighter. But y'all want to say Bud Crawford had a weak resume before he...
Well, right, dude, but how many names did you just mention? And Crawford had around the same amount of fights, at that age. So, I mean, the thing is how many fights did you just mention? All you pretty much mentioned was Victor Postal and Yuriorkis Gamboa. That's all you mentioned. You didn't mention anyone else. And the reason why you didn't mention anyone else is because you know that none of those other fighters are jack shit. There's no offense. But no one cares that he defeated John Molina and Felix Diaz and Diary Jean and Raymundo Beltran and Ricky Burton. No one gives a fuck that he beat those guys. No one cares. No offense. The guys that matter in Crawford's career are about 5 names, 5 to 6 names. The ones that really matter are Gamboa, Postal, Porter, Spence, and Canelo and Madrimov. Those are the only 6 names that people really give a fuck about in Crawford's career. Now, of course, if you're a super fan of Crawford, or if you're really trying to reach, you're going to mention guys like Ndongo and Ricky Burns. But those guys are not really that good. Sorry, but it is what it is.
Canelo. You see, Canelo, when he beat Canelo, that should have ended all of this nonsense resume talk. That should have ended the whole BS about Bud Crawford not having a resume. But before Crawford beat Canelo, Errol Spence Jr., Sean Porter, are you kidding me? My goodness, man, you guys are terrible people, man. I'm not being disrespectful, but Inoue's resume, you can't compare to Bud Crawford's resume. And I'm talking about before Bud Crawford beat Canelo. Sean Porter alone outweighs everyone on Inoue's resume.
Well, does Sean Porter really outweigh everyone alone? Because who has Sean Porter really ever beaten that would outweigh his victory over Stephen Fulton? Does anyone really think that Sean Porter is more skilled than Stephen Fulton? Was Sean Porter ever looked at as in high of esteem? Was Sean Porter ever in a fight against a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter in the world that was looked at as skilled as Inoue, and they said, you know what? Sean Porter has a realistic chance to win this fight. Never happened. I mean, if he was in a fight against Spence, if he was in a fight against Crawford, yeah, he'd give them tough fights, but no one ever actually expected that dude to win. There's no offense. Porter did give some very tough fights, but he was not on the level of a Steven Fulton. I'm sorry, it is what it is. And that's why he lost every big fight of his career, other than that of Danny Garcia and Devin Alexander and those guys. But the true A+ level fighters of those weight classes, he never beat them. He never beat Keith Thurman. He never beat Crawford. He really shouldn't have beat Ugas. They kind of gave him that fight, for the Crawford fight. He didn't beat Kell Brook, and he also did not beat Errol Spence. So, I mean, it is what it is.
And like I said, Victor Postol and Yorkis Gamboa, those two fighters alone are better fighters at that time before Bud fought them, are way better fighters than everyone that Inoue has fought.
No, they're not, but it is what it is.
Inoue's best win was against Steven Fulton. And you're going to tell me that Steven Fulton can beat that version, the undefeated version of a Yorkis Gamboa? Absolutely not.
Well, who knows? Who has Yorkis Gamboa really ever defeated that has really put him on that high of a level? He's defeated guys like Ponce de Leon and, Orlando Salido. A lot of these bums, within some of these weight classes. I mean, he did defeat Orlando Salido, but Salido would kind of become a little bit better in his career. And it's not like Salido was ever looked at as the best of any particular weight class. Like I said, he got that one great win over Lomachenko when he caught him very early. And to be honest with you, kind of pulled a bunch of bullshit in that fight, to be quite honest with you, in order to win that fight. And isn't it very interesting how Dante and these guys, when Ryan Garcia, when he missed weight by 3 pounds over Devin Haney, and they pretty much completely blamed it on that, when he ended up getting his ass whooped over Ryan Garcia, and don't get it twisted. Ryan Garcia was caught on PEDs, and he did miss weight. That at least is a little bit of a factor. But it's so funny how they mention that, but they will never mention how Salido actually missed weight against Lomachenko by a whole 2 pounds. And he was basically throwing low blows that whole entire fucking fight, and that was Lomachenko's second professional fight in his career. And he was already fighting an experience level champion. So, I mean, the context does have to matter there. But anyways.
Yorkis Gamboa, before he fought Bud Crawford, would have dog walked Nonito Donaire and Steven Fulton. He would have knocked out.
Well, I think that he more than likely would have beat Donaire because Donaire was always a little bit overrated in my view. To be quite honest with you, other than Vic Darchinyan, that one overrated ass Romanian fighter, wherever the fuck he was from. I think he was either from Romania or what the hell's that other place that I'm thinking of? I can't fucking remember. But anyways, that dude, I remember when he was looked at as, a high level fighter. Then Nonito Donaire, he ended up getting revenge for his brother, I believe, and, ended up knocking him out. Because, of course, for those of you that don't know, I believe that Nonito Donaire's brother also was a fighter, and Vic Darchinyan beat the shit out of that guy. But anyways, Nonito Donaire, of course, was pretty much known from that. But Donaire, to be quite honest with you, if you take a look at his resume, he really don't have a lot of names that you would really recognize. At least ones that I do not recognize. Now, to be fair, I did not really watch him throughout his whole entire peak. But there's a lot of names there that, to be honest with you, really would not be 8th grade level fighters. That's why when he fought Guillermo Rigondeaux, he kind of got exposed for a certain amount of holes that were in his game. Now, was he someone that was a terrible fighter? No, he was clearly an 8th grade level fighter. But he was never as good as what people claim that he was.
Both of them. You got these weird characters online that want to praise every fighter that doesn't have color in their skin. And they want to disrespect.
Right, and you also have channels out there that want to praise every black fighter out there. So, I mean, it goes both ways. I understand what you're talking about. Now, I'm not going to try to just argue with this man overall at every point because he is right to a degree. But when we talk about, Naoya Inoue, to just say something that, oh, well, every win that Crawford had before that at Canelo Alvarez, or at least these wins were way better than that at Inoue's. No, I can't agree with that. I cannot agree that the Gamboa or the Victor Postol wins, or at the very least the Victor Postol win, was a lot bigger than that of Fulton. And I have to claim that the Fulton win was a decent amount bigger for Inoue, or at least bigger than that for Inoue, because that was his 4th weight class. And that was looked at as one of the biggest fights in boxing. Like, literally everyone was calling for that fight. Now, of course, people were excited about the Crawford and Gamboa fight, and people even had, I believe, Gamboa as the favorite. But, taking a look at it in hindsight, Crawford not only was a decent amount bigger than Gamboa, but he was also clearly more skilled. Now, Inoue obviously is way more skilled than Fulton. Obviously, taking a look at it in hindsight. But I mean, at least that was a fight that was looked at as a truly losable fight. And Inoue was actually even the smaller fighter in there. So it does have to be mentioned.
Every fighter who has color in their skin. You can't compare Inoue's resume to Bud Crawford's resume because their resume are not comparable.
Well, in terms of a complete career, no, not quite as of yet. You cannot compare the resume quite as of yet. Because Inoue would have to defeat not only Junto Nakatani, but he would have to also, in my personal view, beat that of a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and potentially, maybe another, name as well. And then you would probably have to compare it. But they're not quite as far apart as what people are trying to state. Many people try to claim that Terrence Bud Crawford, that he's on this Floyd Mayweather or Sugar Ray Leonard, type of resume. He doesn't have one of those resumes. He just does not.
Bud Crawford, before he beat Canelo, resume was way better than Inoue. And with his victory,
Well, by the time that he defeated Errol Spence Jr., I believe that, he was about 36 years old. So at the end of the day, it should be because he had about 4 more years on his career. Now, in a way, pretty much the last stop in his career is going to have to be 126. I mean, he might try to go one more up from that, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to because in a way, is just not really a natural guy there. He's really more of a natural 118 pounder, and that's really at his biggest. So he's already at a weight class to where he's a little bit outsized. But at 126, he's going to be, a decent amount outsized against some of these guys. So I would love to see him against some of those guys. And that's the division where he's going to have to make the most amount of bang, and it's going to be even greater in hindsight if Inoue is able to win in that weight class because he's a certain amount smaller than a lot of those guys. And some of those guys are real athletes and they're also really skilled. So we'll see.
over Canelo Alvarez, there isn't no longer a conversation about resume.
Well, that is the one point that I will agree with. Inoue does have two victories over guys that were arguably top 5 pound for pound fighters for many years. And on top of that, Canelo was looked at as the former #1 pound for pound fighter. Now, did Crawford fight that version of Canelo Alvarez? No. Did he fight a version of Canelo Alvarez that was in his absolute prime or peak? No, he did not. But he still fought a Canelo that was looked at as top 10 level pound for pound. And a guy that was undisputed at the super middleweight class and was the favorite, including me. I favored him in that fight because I thought that Canelo would combine with his skill and size be a bit too much. But Crawford showed that he was able to handle that weight and that size extraordinarily well. Could that be because of the snack program? Maybe. But of course, we all know that Canelo, that he has his own little program inside his camp as well. So it doesn't really matter. The point is that Crawford was able to handle business. He was able to prove me wrong and a certain amount of other people wrong. So right now, yes, Crawford is clearly in the lead by a decent amount. But if Inoue is able to completely clean out 126 as well as get the victory over Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, in my view, their careers will be comparable, and Inoue may even have a slight lead potentially. But we'll see because there still is a lot left in Inoue's career. So we'll see what ends up happening.
Because who can you compare on Inoue's resume to Canelo? I mean, this is nasty work, man. This is nasty work. This is nasty work. Who on Inoue's resume that you can compare to Canelo Alvarez?
And I do agree with that. Now, that being stated, once again, was Canelo at the absolute peak of his powers? No, he was not. But he still was a relatively great version of himself. And Crawford, of course, was not at the peak of his powers either. So that has to be mentioned as well. But that being stated, overall, I do agree, at least with Bruce Emmett Vane on that point. That's why Inoue is going to have to do a certain amount of work at 126 and probably also beat Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez if he is ever going to be debated over Crawford, because that victory both over Spence and Canelo, it gave Crawford a lot of leeway into those conversations. If Inoue is able to unify 126 and able to beat all those guys there, other than maybe Rafael Espinosa because he's just way too huge, but if he's able to beat those guys as well as Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, Inoue will have a great discussion, within that conversation.
This is nasty work. 3-division undisputed champion with a better resume, but you guys want to, I mean, a new way. No, there's no debating at all. The moment that Bud Crawford beat Errol Spence, that conversation should have been over that day when it came to resume comparison. Boxing fans talked about Sean Porter.
Well, wait a minute. I thought you just stated that the two names that, Crawford ended up beating, that they were already way better than what, Inoue ever fought. So it's very clear that even those guys, that they don't 100% believe that. But I mean, it is what it is. Anyways, but I understand what the man is stating because you could see how at least that is a little bit comparable, even if you don't believe that Fulton was better than Postal or Gamboa, which he probably was, at least better than Postal. But I mean, the thing is that yes, after Errol Spence, there's just no name that Inoue has ever defeated that I would have to claim is bigger than Errol Spence. So right now, Crawford is in the lead with that. That's why, in a way, in order to be in those all-time great conversations or in the same level as a Usyk or a Crawford, he is going to have to defeat certain guys. Not only like a Junto Nakatani, but a Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, probably later on a Bruce Shoo Shoo Carrington, although he just became a champion, and Wipeout 126 as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see his run there.
Consistently. Boxing fans talked about Yorkis Gamboa consistently. And I'm talking about during the time when he was undefeated, when he was at the top of his game. Yorkis Gamboa was considered one of the best fighters in the sport of boxing.
Yes, and so was Steve Van Fulton. Steve Van Fulton also was talked about consistently, especially once he became somewhat of a semi-unified champ there and beat Brandon Figueroa and Angelo Leo. So he also was, a very well talked about fighter, especially by a lot of the LDBC and new media channels. Of course, until they could not use him anymore, But anyways, but Gamboa, of course, was very well talked about, especially because he was a gold medalist, I believe, or, had that Cuban Olympic pedigree, but he never really quite lived up to the hype.
I'm not talking about this version of a Yorkis Gamboa. No, no, no. I'm talking about the Yorkis Gamboa that boxing fans enjoyed watching. I'm talking about the Yorkis Gamboa that people wanted to see fight Juan Manuel Lopez. I'm talking about that version of a Yorkis Gamboa. Yorkis Gamboa was one of the best fighters in boxing. He was a conversation during his time.
He was looked at as very talented, but it's hard for me to say that he truly was ever one of the best fighters in boxing. I mean, he was one of the best fighters in boxing, but it's a little bit hard to determine because he just never fought anyone that was really that elite. So I mean, the thing is that it's a little bit hard. And after Terrence Bud Crawford, he pretty much was done after that. So it's just very hard to judge. It's very unfortunate. It would have been lovely to see him against guys like Mikey Garcia, maybe even a prime Lomachenko, certain guys like that. Now, do I believe that he would have beat either of those guys? He may have had a chance against Mikey just because Mikey doesn't have the quickest of feet, but I don't think that he would have beat a peak version of Mikey. Mikey, I think, would have been too good, too well as a counterpuncher, and too consistent, in terms of a defensive all-around fighter. Mikey is someone that is a tremendous level fighter, and I definitely don't think that he would have beat Lomachenko. Lomachenko, I think, would have stopped Gamboa eventually.
Victor Postal was a conversation.
Victor Postal was a conversation for about 9 months when he defeated Lucas Matisse and then lost to Crawford, and then he was never talked about again. Let's stop pretending like Victor Postal was a true conversation. No one ever talks about that motherfucker anymore. People talked about him for a year when he was a champion, when he had that one good victory over Lucas Matisse, and then he was never to be heard from ever again after he lost to Crawford. And it was one of the worst pay-per-view bombs of all time. I believe that it literally got less than like 50,000 pay-per-view numbers. So, I mean, the thing overall is that this bullshit about how Postal was a big name and a conversation starter, no, he fucking wasn't. No offense. And after that, he was never talked about again.
A big conversation, a huge conversation. I mean, I'm not even going to get into Errol Spence Jr. I mean, there's no need to talk about Errol Spence Jr. because everybody and their mama talked about Errol Spence Jr. And I'm talking about before he became world champion. When he was a prospect, he was a huge conversation. Showtime, Sean Porter. I mean, this is the point in this conversation because, again, the only two fighters that you guys only talk about on Inoue's resume is Stephen Fulton and Nonito Donaire. Who are the rest of the fighters that this man's beaten?
Right, and I understand what the man is claiming there, but, I also believe that, overall, and let's also not forget that there, once again, are certain fighters that are not talked about that much, but they are decent fighters. Like Israel Madrimov, for example. He's not really talked about that much, but he was also one of the better fighters that Crawford had fought. He was an A- level fighter. So just because a fighter is not talked about that much does not necessarily mean that they don't deserve credit. And MJ Akhmadaliev, keep in mind that he was very much well talked about. He was a guy that, for those lower weight classes, he was very well talked about. Because not only was he a semi-unified champion, he was an Olympian. So this was, and he was a medalist winner. He was someone that actually had real talent. He wasn't just one of these bum-ass Olympians that, like Ivan Redkach or something like that did well in the Olympics and then was never to be heard from again. He actually was someone that was legit. And Ronald DePaula ended up beating him, and Luis Neri, of course, was very well talked about. Not quite as much after he lost to Brandon Figueroa, but he still was very well talked about. So to be quite honest with you, Luis Neri and MJ Akhmadaliev, they probably were more conversation starters than Victor Postal, to be quite honest with you.
Who are they? With John Bucks and Inoue, we got all these belts. Who were the previous owners of those belts? Let's start there.
And I will personally state that, but just because a fighter ends up unifying a weight class or, beating guys that had former belts, it doesn't always mean that those belt holders were shit. I've seen a lot of belt holders that made shit. Take a look at Mario Barrios, for example. Jesus Christ. That dude who just fought Ryan Garcia, like, that's a dude who never should have had a belt in the fucking first place. Like, that dude is such a joke of a champion. And I know that I'm going hard in on Mario Barrios, but give me a fucking break. I mean, Jesus Christ, you end up winning a belt overall at that weight class, and then in your 2 title defenses, you can't even defend the fucking belt. You have a draw? You have a draw against a guy, and Abel Ramos, I believe his name is, who, had 3 losses prior already. You can even beat him, and then in your second fight, you face a 46-year-old Manny Pacquiao who's been out of the ring for 4 years, and you couldn't even beat him? Like, Jesus Christ. There are certain guys out there that really just should not be champions. Now, some of those fighters, of course, that Inoue fought, I also agree should have never been champions, like Paul Butler and certain guys like that. But he also beat some guys that were legit. Like, if you talk about Luis Neri, MJ Akhmadaliev, Marlon DePaula, those guys were, in my view, for those weight classes, A-minus level fighters. Anyways.
You know who Bud Crawford beat to become world champion because you talked about them. You all consistently talked about the fighters that Bud Crawford had to beat to become world champion.
Right, they talk about the 6 fighters that Terrence Bud Crawford had to beat in his 40-something fight career that he had to become champion. People do talk about, once again, Inoue defeating guys like Fulton and DePaulas and MJ Akhmadaliev and Luis Neri. They do talk about those victories. They also talk about Donaire, But once again, sometimes name recognition can be a little bit deceiving.
You know who he beat to become world champion. And because you talked about the fighters that Bud Crawford beat. Well, who are the other fighters that Inoue beat to become world champion? Who were the previous owners of those belts that Inoue now has hanging in his closet? Because that matters. Opponents matters.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it, overall for this video. I might review, the second part just because he's talking about Junto Nakatani. I'm going to review the second one, and then, we'll end this video. I know that this one is a little bit long, but anyways. Anyways, we're going to do this second video though here. Maybe not the whole thing, but at least a part of it. Because John Boxing overall did mention some points here that I thought were very, very decent. Some that I ended up agreeing with, some that I disagreed, of course. But, of course, a certain amount of the LDBC and New Media fan base, they are, of course, trying to claim that this fight is quote-unquote, that it's not worth it. Of course, I don't agree with that. Now, do I agree that Junto Nakatani, that he's not quite, as elite as some other people claim he is? Well, it's hard to say how elite he actually is because, he's not really faced that many great opponents in my view, or really any known opponents, in my view, or, excuse me, at least a lot of them. But, he is someone that is very talented. So this still is a very, very big fight, and it's still one of the biggest fights that could happen out there. So I do think that this is going to count yet again, or should, as another clear A-grade level win for Inoue until proven otherwise. We'll see if Junto Nakatani, if he ends up, losing to Inoue, that is, if he's not able to beat any other A-grade level fighters, well, then we'll have our answer. But I mean, the thing is that, we'll see how this ends up. But, of course, a lot of people are trying to claim that this is not a big fight because, they realize that this may put Inoue even higher in the pound-for-pound list, or that this is going to look better for his resume. But I promise you that if it was Fulton or something like that, that was undefeated, they, of course, would be claiming this would be a huge fight. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what these gentlemen have to say.
See, Junto Nakatani and Inoue, these guys, people love to talk about, these guys beat all these champions. Inoue's beat 24 champions. Junto beat all these champions. Okay? Who are those champions? Why does that question offend people?
And I agree with Mr. John Boxon there. Just because you defeat a former champion does not mean, overall that they were great champions, or even when they hold the belt. Like I said, look at Mario Barrios. Look at his bum ass. Like, if someone were to unify 147 right now, it's not really the most talented weight class. Like, if Terrence Bud Crawford were to just wash through that weight class, would anyone really claim that it was, as impressive, even as his one victory over Canelo? Of course not. Or even if you don't want to compare Canelo, because of course I was moving up a couple weight classes, is it would Terrence Bud Crawford winning at all of 147 right now, would it even be as impressive as that one victory over a Sean Porter or an Errol Spence? Maybe more impressive than a Sean Porter, because to be fair, Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney are both there, but it definitely wouldn't be more impressive than Errol Spence in my view.
Belts don't define the fighter. You know that. All you guys should know that.
Well, belts can define a fighter to a degree, but they're not all that defines a fighter. When you have certain people overall that go in this, very limited sort of mindset where, like I see this all the time, like this is something that LeBron James fans, always have to say, which I believe that John Boxing actually is a LeBron James fan. So it makes fucking sense. But I mean, the thing is like, this reminds me of the LeBron James fans, arguments all the time. They say, well, Michael Jordan, he only has 6 rings, and, that's the only argument. Well, no, that's not the only argument. That's what the mainstream media wanted you to believe, especially LeBron James with his paid off, people in the media. But I mean, no, Michael Jordan has almost everything over LeBron James. He has a lot of stats. He has PER. Now, of course, LeBron has updated his stats because he knows that that's pretty much going to be the only way that he really beats Michael Jordan. But I mean, the thing overall is that in terms of MVPs, in terms of championships, finals MVPs, winning when it matters the most, coming up big, clutchness, when you talk about, overall certain other things like that, defensive accolades and defensive players of the years, he played for like 13 and a half years, I believe, total for his career. And he has like double the accomplishments of LeBron, at least in certain winning areas. So, I mean, it's just really not that close. So the thing is that belts can define a fighter to a degree, but it's not the only thing that defines them. There are certain fighters that they win a belt and then they lose it the next fight and they're never heard from again. Fighters like David Lemieux, fighters like Mario Barrios, fighters like other guys like that. So, I mean, there are levels to champions. But we have to take a look at it, like when we talk about Inoue's resume, Nakatani, of course, would be a big win because Nakatani is a legit talented 3-weight division champion. Now, I do believe that he lost that last fight to Sebastian Hernandez, but, I've also seen fighters that, they ended up probably should have losing a fight, but that doesn't mean that they're not talented. Like Richardson Hitchens, he really should have lost that fight to Lemos not too long ago, but he's still a relatively talented fighter. I wouldn't claim that he's an A-grade level fighter, but he's a very talented fighter. So, I mean, the point is that just because a fighter ends up, having a very unimpressive performance, doesn't always necessarily mean they're not A-grade. So, I don't know how good Nakatani really is. Would he be on my personal top 10 pound for pound list? No, but he'd probably be around top 20. So, I mean, it is what it is. But this would be a very big win.
What defines a fighter is who they beat. That is what defines a fighter. Legacy is not determined on a hardware. Legacy is determined on the opponent.
Well, it's determined by a little bit of both. But the thing that is the most important is that you won belts off of the quote-unquote fighters that you ended up beating. So I do agree with John Boxing. And that goes pretty much with any sport. We have to see how you react under adversity. So what that means is that we have to see, the level of competition that you can beat. You have to beat A-grade level fighters in order to be remembered as an all-time grade level fighter. Just is what it is.
So Inoue beating all these champions and Junto beating all these champions means absolutely nothing when you can't even have a conversation about all those champions that Junto and Inoue has beaten. I'm still waiting for somebody, okay, somebody to break down the opponents that Junto Nakatani and Inoue has fought and beaten.
Well, I can break down a whole bunch of the opponents that Naoya Inoue has fought. Now, some people, of course, when they come on my channel, they'll mention, I believe that early guy that he beat, Navarez, or whatever his name was, or, Narete, or, some Filipino, dude, I believe his name was, or maybe it was another guy, some guy that was a multiple weight division champion, I think, with a whole bunch of title defenses. I never really heard of the dude, and to be honest with you, his boxing ability did not look that great to me. But of course, I can remember certain guys like Jamie McDonald. A lot of people may not remember him, but he actually was remembered as a, decent fighter. And Inoue had knocked him out in the first round, and Inoue was a decent amount smaller than him, and he beat the shit out of that man. He beat the shit out of that man like Jamie McDonnell or his cousin or something like that. Like they did just jumped him and his father in the parking lot the day before. Inoue, Inoue beat the hell out of that man. But the point overall is that, I seen him, somewhat get a start there. That's when I probably first heard of Inoue. That's, I was like, wow. Like, this guy is relatively special, but we'll see if he can continue with moving up the weight classes with more talent. Unfortunately, we never got to see the Chocolatitos or the Juan Francisco Estradas versus that of Inoue, but it is what it is. And of course, later on, he would beat guys like Carlos Payano, I believe, or certain guys like that. B grade level fighter, not A grade level fighter, but he would beat some other fighters as well that were fairly decent. Emmanuel Rodriguez, who was undefeated, who beat one of the Russell brothers. I don't think that he's an A grade level fighter, but he is someone that at least was decent. And then, of course, he would eventually get his wins over Paul Butler, guys like that. I believe that he also beat one of the Maloney brothers, So a lot of these names, are not really that good, but the names that definitely do stick are guys like the Palas, MJ Akhmadaliev, Louis Neri, Stephen Fulton, and of course also, if you want to claim Nonito Donaire as well. But anyway.
It's pretty pathetic that after all these years, no one has came on here and done an honest breakdown about the opponents that Junto Nakatani and Inoue has beaten to become.
Well, the valid point that John Boxing is bringing up here is Mr. Junto Nakatani's record, because no offense, but a lot of the fighters that he's fought, is like, who the fuck are these guys? Like, I've taken a look at his record, and it's like, some of these guys that he's defeated have literally had some, really trash-ass resumes, or trash-ass records, So it's very obvious that Junto Nakatani, that he was somewhat promoted, in order to kind of put Inoue higher on the pound-for-pound list, but Nakatani also does have some, relevance. He is a very talented fighter. He is an A-grade level fighter, at least so far from what we know. This is a big fight, so it's not like Nakatani has no substance whatsoever, but he definitely is being a little bit pushed by that of the media because, they want to make this, seem like, possibly a, top 10 level pound-for-pound fight. I do not believe that it is. I think that Inoue is fighting a top 20 pound-for-pound fighter potentially, but we still have to see how Junto Nakatani does later on in the future, if he's even still the same fighter after Inoue more than likely thrashes him. And I could be wrong. Maybe Nakatani actually will beat Inoue. I don't believe so, but we'll see what happens.
World champion. Marlon Tabalis, Paul Butler. I mean, who are those guys? Honestly. When you look at the Inoue's resume and the Junto Nakatani's resume, who's there? Honestly, who's there? And this offends people, and it should not offend anyone because at the end of the day, Inoue, someone telling the truth about Inoue has nothing to do with fans. I don't know why you guys put yourselves in front of these fighters like you're taking a bullet for them.
Well, I understand what you're saying, mister, but I also have to say the same for you because the last time I remember your channel, you were also trying to, claim how great, of the record that Gervonta Tank Davis had or the resume that he had. No offense, but Gervonta's fought a whole lot of bums. It's really no offense. Now you might be able to debate that some of those fighters are greater than that of Inoue's opponents to a degree, but I don't think that he's ever defeated someone on the level of a Stephen Fulton. And to be honest with you, I don't even think that that's debatable. Now, you can debate if you want to that Garcia or Frank Martin could be more talented if you wanted to. But there's no way that you can claim that they're for sure more talented because what the fuck have they ever really done? I mean, sure, Ryan Garcia beat a dead body in Mario Barrios, and, I believe that, what the fuck is his name? Frank Martin, he's a very decent fighter, but he's never even been a champion. And he just had to draw against a fighter that really was not that good. So, I mean, is what it is. But, standards go both ways.
They don't even know you. You can't even speak the same language to them. You don't even know their culture. You guys jump in front of these foreign fighters, these non-FBA fighters, to protect them from criticism, but you won't do the same for all fighters.
Well, I agree, but isn't it kind of the same thing with you? No offense, but you're trying to sit here and claim about how great Crawford's resume was. No one really overall was talking about guys like Victor Postal and Gamboa really that much when Crawford defeated them. Especially once Gamboa lost. He pretty much was a complete afterthought after that happened. So I mean, it is what it is. And Postal was never really that talked about in the first place. So I understand what you're talking about, but come on.
What, these guys are above criticism? And telling the truth about these Juntos and in new ways, it's not criticism. It's actually it's a truth. These guys.
Well, it's the truth to a degree. I think that Inoue deserves a little bit more credit than what John Boxing is giving him, but I do have to agree to a degree with Junto Nakatani because no offense, but it's like who the fuck are these guys that he's facing? You know, the only guy that I really remember that he's fought has been Sebastian Hernandez, and the reason why that is because Sebastian Hernandez probably really should have won that fight.
Don't have a resume. Junto Nakatani has to beat Inoue to get his resume started.
Well, in order for him to get actual true top 10, or top 5 pound for pound acclaim, yes, that is, what he would have to do. So I do agree there.
That's a shame. Junto Nakatani has to beat Inoue to get his resume started. To put a legit opponent on his resume, that is a shame. It's a shame because Junto Nakatani is on the pound for pound list, but he has to beat Inoue to get his resume started. It's like kind of like with Golovkin years ago, when Golovkin was.
But this is the thing overall that John Boxing is confusing me with. But I think I understand because I think that John Boxing doesn't want to receive too much criticism or seem like a quote unquote super racial fan or something. But he's even put Junto Nakatani on this top 10 pound for pound list. So, I mean, you can't sit here and bitch and then in your former videos put Junto Nakatani on your pound for pound list, even if it's low. If you don't believe that he's top 10 pound for pound, then it's fine, but don't put him on your list at all. It comes across as, you believe overall that Junto, should be on the pound for pound list, but then at the same time, overall, you're not being authentic with what you truly believe. I think that John Boxing probably believes that Junto really does not, belong there, but he's also a little bit afraid overall that people are going to criticize him a little bit too much. At the end of the day, this is just my personal view, and I love Inoue as a fighter, and I think that Nakatani is talented. Nakatani is not on my top 10 pound for pound list. I can name you 10 fighters on a pound for pound list right now that I would rather have instead of Junto Nakatani, just in my view. Of course, number 1, you have Usyk. At number 2, you would have Inoue. At number 3, you would have Dimitri Bivol. Now after that, I'm not really quite sure who I would have in what order. But after that, of course, you would have guys like Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney. That's already 5 fighters right there. Artur Beterbiev would still probably have to be on the list, although I usually have a rule that I don't have anyone, without a belt. But because he's only ever lost to Dimitri Bivol, I would have him there. So that's 6 fighters that I just mentioned. And then, of course, after that, you have Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez. That's 7, and I'm trying to think of who else probably would be on that list. I'm trying to think if, there's any other fighters. David Benavidez probably would have to be up there. So that would be 8. I believe that there may be some other fighters, but I would have to really think about that. I'm trying to think if, there are any other fighters at the current moment in time. Are there any fighters at 140 overall that I would, I don't think there's any fighters there. Maybe a 135, don't think so. Because I would not have Javante. Well, one could debate that Javante deserves to be over Junto Nakatani on the list, although he's not really confirmed on my top 10 list, but one could debate that he's there. There might be a couple of other fighters, but I would have to really look at it. Anyways.
On the pound for pound list, and he was very high on the pound for pound list. And all what he needed to do was beat Canelo Alvarez, and he would have been the number 1 pound for pound fighter. But it didn't work out for him. Kovalev, same thing. Kovalev's best win before he lost to Andre Ward was against a 49-year-old Bernard Hopkins.
Well, although I don't think Bernard Hopkins was quite the same fighter. Once again, I've already stated this. Every time Bernard was in the ring against a guy that could truly handle his size and was actually pound for pound talented, he pretty much lost. There's no offense. That's A. And B, overall, Bernard actually was ranked in the top 10 at the time. So the fact that Kovalev was able to beat him 12 rounds to 0 actually had impressed a certain amount of people. Now, was it a Bernard at the peak of his powers? No. But, it still was relatively impressive. It, of course, wasn't as impressive as certain people try to make it out to be, but it still was impressive. And of course, he also eventually beat John Pascal. What I will personally state is this. I also did wonder how Sergey the Crusher Kovalev really eventually got up to the top 2 pound for pound because, in my view, he never really had the resume that deserved him to be quite up there. But anyway, and kind of the same with Golovkin. Golovkin was a great fighter in my view, as well as Kovalev to a degree, but I don't think that either of those guys really deserve top two pound for pound acclaim. Not with the resumes that they had. I can maybe understand Golovkin more to a degree just because, he was avoided for a time and there was a lot of fighters that did not want to fight him. All the way from, Miguel Cotto to Sergio Martinez to Canelo Alvarez. But, Sergey Kovalev, to be fair, he did defeat a top 10 pound for pound of Bernard Hopkins, and he also did defeat that, in a Jean Pascal. And of course, let me not forget that fight with Adonis Stevenson was supposed to happen, but he basically avoided Sergey Kovalev like the plague. He did not want to get in the ring with that man. That's another fighter that people don't really talk about much anymore, although he was a pound for pound level talent because Stevenson really didn't fight shit in his career in the second half. He beat Chad Dawson that one time, and then after that, he literally went on like a ducking tour for like the next 10 fucking years. Like, he didn't fight anybody. He was supposed to fight Kovalev. He was supposed to eventually fight some of those other guys. Then when he finally got in the ring when he was a bit older against the guy who actually mattered, and Alexander Vosdig, then he got his shit canned. And I like Stevenson. Stevenson was actually a very talented fighter. But, he should have gotten in the ring with Sergey Kovalev.
49, that was his best win. John Pascal, those wins were solid, but John Pascal was never elite. But Sergey Kovalev's best win before he lost to Andre Ward was against a 49-year-old Bernard Hopkins, but yet he was top 5 on the pound for pound list. It's nasty work.
Well, I agree with that, but then we also need to talk about how Terence Bud Crawford was on the top 5 pound for pound list or top 3 for such a long time, even when he never defeated anyone on the top 10 pound for pound list. We need to talk about that as well. Now, one maybe can debate that was because Crawford was a 2A division champion, but if we're also going to mention the Caucasian or the non-black fighters, we also need to mention the black fighters if we're going to claim that we keep the same standards. Why was Terence Bud Crawford ranked within the top 2 or top 3 pound for pound for about 10 years? Even overall, once again, when his best wins over guys like Postol and Gamboa, those guys were never top 10 pound for pound, ever.
I'm not saying Sergey Kovalev wasn't a good fighter. Now, I'm not saying Junto or Inoue are not good fighters. But the truth is, they hadn't fought anyone.
Well, the truth is that Junto Nakatani hasn't really fought anybody. Inoue has fought, a few names that you could classify as A grade. Like I said, Louis Neri, maybe Nonito Donaire, Marlon Tapales, MJ Ahmed Aliev, Stevan Fulton, and of course, is there a name that I'm forgetting there? I think there might be one more. Marlon Tapales, Neri, MJ Ahmed Aliev, Fulton, and Donaire. No, I guess that's about it. Anyway.
When are people going to start putting pressure on Inoue and Junto to actually fight legit opponents?
Well, that actually is a fair point by John Boxing. Inoue is eventually going to have to move up to 126, but I think even he knows this, and I think that it's coming at the right time because he's going to have to fight Junto Nakatani, and then he's going to have to go to 126, because no offense, but there's just, unless you're fighting Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, who the fuck else is there at the lower weight classes? There's just no one else.
Oh, well, they're going to fight each other. Okay, then what? Then what? What's after each other?
Well, I think that Inoue has already explained that he's going to go up to 126 because there's been conversations about him facing guys like Nick Ball. He's also expressed interest in Bruce Shushu Carrington. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
You see, that it goes to show you that these foreign fighters only have to do the bare minimum. Oh, John Boxing, a new way, 24 world titles, and beating all these.
Well, I understand what the man is trying to say, but it's not just foreign fighters. The truth is that there are certain fighters overall that are promoted and pushed, and don't get it twisted. Are there a certain amount of channels and also, boxing analysts out there that, with foreign fighters and non-black fighters, they only have to do the bare minimum in order to be, ranked high? Yes, of course. But it also happens with black fighters as well, because no offense. But Terence Bud Crawford was kind of doing the bare minimum for years. So was Deontay Wilder. So has Gervonta Tank Davis. Like, these are all black fighters that were looked at as pound for pound level fighters. And they really, to be quite honest with you, were doing the bare minimum, at least in terms of a resume, for a very long time. It is what it is. Like, I remember when Deontay Wilder was being discussed as the best heavyweight in the world. And it's like, how could you ever debate that? Like maybe if you want to claim overall that he was gonna beat everybody, I guess, but you literally had people saying that no, Deontay's a legit top 10 pound for pound fighter. It's like from beating who? Like Luis fucking Ortiz. Luis Ortiz was the only fighter that he really ever defeated. To be quite honest with you, he was really the only live body in there. Every other fighter that Deontay had fought really was a bum. I mean, it's no offense. I mean, Bermain Severn and Luis Ortiz, I'll give him that. But who the fuck were the rest of these guys, man? Like Chris Arreola, who was an older and even fatter version of himself. Like I didn't even think it was possible for him to get fatter, but he got even fatter. So on top of that, he was older, he wasn't even as quick, and he was fatter. So that was the thing. And on top of that, overall he faced guys like Eric Molina, Artur Spilska, Johan Duapas. Like who the fuck are these guys? Like no offense against Wilder, but Wilder had one of the fakest fucking careers of all time. And don't get it twisted. He, in my view, was at one time a legit A grade level fighter. But it's just so hard to tell about how good he actually was. Because this man fought so many tomato cans.
Are these champions? Seriously. Just because you beat someone, just because a fighter beats someone for a belt, doesn't mean he beat someone who was elite.
And I do agree with that. But anyways, I'm going to pretty much end off the video here because he's pretty much making the same points. And there's not really anything else to take from it. But I wanted to review that because there were certain points that I agreed with. Like with Gennady Golovkin and Sergey Kovalev being as high as what they were on the pound for pound list at one time. I also agree that in terms of resume, that they did not deserve to be quite that high. Or at least, you could debate it. Because Golovkin had never defeated any top 10 level pound for pound fighter. So you had at one time people actually debating that he should have been number one pound per pound. And at one time, he did look like he could have had the momentum for that. And, to be fair, he was avoided to a degree. But, he was only ever in one weight class. That's A. B, he was never completely unified in the weight class. And on top of that, he was he never defeated someone that was top 10 pound for pound, at least not legitimately. So, I mean, I also agree with that. And Kovalev was someone that, although he was a relatively great fighter as well, he was someone also that in terms of resume, his resume was a bit lacking as well. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later, and we'll see where this goes next.